The Grenfell Tower fire had a lot of causes, direct and indirect. But the problems here, and those now discovered in other tower blocks, reflect that building rules haven't kept pace with our construction methods.
The government have prioritised insulation over fire safety, and it's quite a tempting proposition because it's going to insulation affects every building, fires only affect a very small number of buildings.
Thermal efficiency is the part of the building codes that have changed the most in the past 40 years. First, after the oil shock of the 1970s, and more recently because of concerns about climate change and fuel poverty. Quite rightly, our rules have aimed for ever warmer homes. Grenfell's planning application explained,
insulation improvements may only happen once or twice in a building's lifetime due to the complexity and disruption caused. For this reason, we're going over and above current building regulations.
There's another reason, though, why developers have gone well beyond the basic regulatory requirements for energy efficiency. At Grenfell Tower, the renovation actually got funded in part by something called the Energy Company Obligation, which is a public policy intervention by the government which forces energy companies to put money into making older buildings more energy efficient. In the Grenfell Tower case, that money went into a new district heating system, not into insulation. But if you go just down the road, that's the Edward Woods estate. And in that case, the eco money went straight into new non-combustible insulation on the outside of the towers. These policies, regulations and other initiatives have sharpened up incentives for builders to try out new insulators, like so-called PIR plastic foams. That's the insulation that was installed at Grenfell.
A PIR foam is a better insulator, and therefore it's going to give you better heat economy for the same thickness of material or the same weight of material. It's cheaper and it's lighter, so it's going to require less material to hold it in place, and it's going to require less cost in terms of lifting it up to wherever you're going to install it. But it obviously has this big drawback in terms of fire safety, that the foams are organic based and therefore they're combustible.
The rules advise that insulation on tall buildings should basically not be flammable. But in the early 2000s, a rule was introduced stating you can use such combustible materials on a tall building if it passes a test. You have to replicate the design you want to install, then set a fire under it. But here is a video produced by an insulation manufacturer for its customers. As an alternative to a full test, it highlights a route known as a desktop study. If an engineer believes something very similar to your proposed design has already been tested, you don't need to test yours. Newsnight has already revealed how some engineers really stretch the definition of what's similar in these desktop studies in order to avoid further tests. We've also revealed how some building inspection agencies have been routinely signing off using combustible insulation and combustible exterior cladding without even so much as a desktop study. So there's been too little testing, and the ones that have been done are confidential.
The trouble is, some manufacturers we know have a very extensive library of the full-scale tests to prove their material. Others, it's very difficult to discern whether they have or not. So we're totally reliant on the way that they market the product to us. So if you see a claim saying this product is suitable above 18 metres, and then that you read governing authorities' literature that endorses that, then yes, we are going to believe that that is a suitable material.
One company that insures industrial buildings got worried about the tests themselves.
We've seen several fires involving combustible insulation, and we were concerned that the laboratory tests on this type of plastic insulation didn't really reflect the risk in the real world.
Normal lab test insulation is installed to perfect standards. But a few years ago, the insurer commissioned tests on this widely made insulation type installed with real-world, normal workmanship. The traditional insulation here, it held out for an hour. But the combustible PIR insulation didn't. The fire monitoring equipment was destroyed in about 17 minutes by the heat. A much worse performance than previous lab tests had suggested. There's also a problem with toxicity.
The trouble with this material is that it's got a lot of nitrogen in it, and therefore when it burns it produces both carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide. And so this small amount of material, if it burnt in a house or a flat, would be enough to fill the whole house or flat with toxic smoke, enough to stop you escaping and kill you.
The British Rigid Urethane Foam Manufacturers Association, a trade body, said that the design of the insurer's fire test was flawed.
No one can yet state with certainty what the source of the toxic gas at Grenfell was. We should wait until the results of the public inquiry before drawing conclusions.
The government has been shocked to learn this month how far fire standards are from where they had expected. That's why they believe a review of them is now necessary.
Government has consistently put pressure on the industry to clean up its act on safety. The CSCS card scheme was seen as part of the solution. At this huge housing development in Greenwich, it's essential for workers to have a CSCS card in order to get a job. The smart cards are supposed to prove what skills and qualifications each worker has, and that they've passed the required safety exams. Demand for the cards is growing, and with that has come fraud. And serious questions about the smart cards, used by the construction industry to check the qualifications of its workers.
That's fine, thank you very much.
We've exposed fraud, cheating
16 is A.
and criminality.
60, 280 and 300.
Perfect.
Exam centre bosses who fix passes for cash.
Both guarantee passes on both tests.
Yeah.
This site managers, yeah?
Yes.
So it's site management training scheme, but the other one is site supervisor training.
Okay.
Yeah?
Unqualified workers. Here it is. This certificate proves we've undergone and passed a tough course, been supervised by a qualified tutor, and despite doing absolutely nothing, we can now use the certificate. It's a vital stepping stone to getting a CSCS card, allowing us to supervise scores of workers. With the certificates from this investigation, we obtain CSCS cards, and we're offered work at a school, a power station, and numerous building sites, with no training or skills whatsoever. Crossrail, Balfour Beatty and Heathrow Airport are just some of the major companies that insist on CSCS cards. In the light of Newsnight's evidence, one large construction firm says it leaves huge questions about the whole scheme.
We're going to hurt people, we're going to actually kill people doing this, because people will be given this card. We assume, based on that relevant certificate, that you're competent to do exactly what you're supposed to. We will let you carry out the works and you will kill somebody.
I will never trust the card scheme again.
Cladding is starting to come off buildings across England because it's not to code. In Islington, the external panels of this council-owned property are coming down already because they were deemed insufficiently fireproof by an official government test. And they're hardly alone.
I can inform the House that as of midday today, the cladding from 75 high-rise buildings in 26 local authority areas has failed the combustibility test.
The government's official building regulations are set out in something called Approved Document B. And what that says is that insulation products attached to the outside of buildings of more than 18 metres tall must meet stringent fire standards. Specifically, they must be of materials that are either non-combustible or of very limited combustibility. In the jargon, they must be of grade A2 or better. That is what these tests are all about. How then can it be that buildings have been fitted with cladding that doesn't meet that requirement. Building inspectors don't always rely directly on the rules set by the government. The inspectors, who these days are largely privately employed, use guidelines to the rules written by professional bodies representing the sector.
It's been some time since the relevant regulations were updated, and the industry has to keep up with changing technology, changing customer demands. It has to turn to its specialists, to consultants for advice on these issues, because it can't depend on the regulations alone.
These sector guidelines actually allow builders to get insulation or cladding that doesn't meet the A2 standard past inspectors, for example via a so-called fire test. So you rig up your proposed cladding as it would be used and then see what happens when it's exposed to fire. If the system as a whole performs well, then it's signed off, even if individual parts would fail on their own. So some of the cladding failing tests right now may have been rigorously tested as part of a system. There are, though, rather less rigorous routes.
If no actual fire test data exists for a particular system, the client may instead submit a desktop study report from a suitable body stating whether, in their opinion, combustibility criteria would be met.
That's guidance from the Building Control Alliance, the BCA, a body representing the great and good of building. Builders can use data from old tests to get combustible materials signed off in new scenarios without doing any further fire tests. This opaque process is a vulnerability in the compliance process. Newsnight, though, has found another weakness in the regulation. This is a piece of guidance from the NHBC, a sector body and a major supplier of building inspectors. And what it says is that rather than everything needing to be A2, you can use B-grade cladding and B-grade insulation material without even needing a desktop study. That is because, they say, there have been so many desktop studies and so many fire tests. In essence, they've decided that the government's rules are too strict. NHBC said that this guidance was issued
on the basis of NHBC having reviewed a significant quantity of data from a range of tests and desktop assessments.
They also stressed that thorough assessments by their inspectors haven't allowed the use of plastic cord cladding, such as that used at Grenfell under this guidance. Earlier tonight, though, we learned that one of the insulation products they propose using with B-grade cladding is actually C-grade insulation. This guidance takes us a long way from A2.
There's a world of interest.
So does it much matter legally that builders follow sector guidelines, not government rules? Well, yes, but in the event of a civil case, the sector guidelines would matter.
Yes, it does, because breach of the regulations will be very strong evidence in a civil claim against a builder. However, in the absence of up-to-date regulations, in the absence of clarity, then general guidance, compliance with general guidance could also be a defence.
So the building codes are a mess, and the government is slow to update its regulations. But had contractors just stuck with them, they would now be pulling less cladding off high-rises.